It's good to be together again, and on that note, there are some masks out on that table just outside the door. If anybody would feel more comfortable, we brought them for you to wear. But I'm glad to be together here to have a conversation around the increasing use of the High Peaks region of the Adirondacks and the challenges that causes on the infrastructure here and some potential solutions, things being done in some areas outside of the Blue Line that can give us some ideas for what's happening here. But before we get to all of that and our panel, thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to say a few thank yous, and I want to start by thanking the Adirondack Mountain Club for hosting us here. Visitor centers and welcome centers are part of the solution. So we're really glad to be here in this space while we're talking about education and how that makes a difference. And I also want to thank the Explorer staff. I was going to tell you that the entire team was here today, but Chris Rady was here earlier and had to leave. But we do have, everyone else is here, though I don't see everybody in the room right now. They're on their way. But we have the editor, Jim O'Dono, there in the back by the door. Not here yet, but the digital editor, Melissa Hart, will be here. We've got our director of operations, Michael Armstrong. She needs no introduction, but our associate publisher, Betsy Dernberger, is here somewhere. Water reporter, Zach Matson. Our policy reporter, Gwendolyn Craig, who's going to be leading the discussion today. Our multimedia reporter, Mike Lynch, behind the camera over there. And we have two fantastic interns this summer. One is on her way, Isanya Gonzalez and Chloe Bennett. They are from the CUNY Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism in New York City. So they're really terrific, teaching us some things this summer. In 2020 and 2021, the Adirondack Explorer went outside of the park looking at some of the solutions being done elsewhere on the challenges facing the High Peaks region with increased usage. We originally in 2020 had big plans to travel out to the West Coast to some of the national parks, and you all know what happened next. We ended up staying a little closer to home and took trips by car, but we, Brandon did go out for a little while. He had family out there, but we traveled by car to some places closer to home, which are two places that come up in a lot of the discussions when you're talking about solutions to some of the same challenges that we're having here. And they are Acadia National Park in Maine and Franconia Notch State Park in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And also we traveled to the Catskills. Gwen and Mike Lynch did most of that reporting. Brandon Loomis, our former editor, who's also here tonight, went out to Grand Teton National Park and did some work out there. We learned a lot about solutions to parking, solutions for parking, for shuttles, education, sustainable trails, visitor centers, permits, and about collecting science and data. And today we're going to really focus on the education portion of all those things, looking at the education of visitors who come to this region, and also the education through data and science of the stakeholders who are trying to come up with solutions to some of these challenges. So as I mentioned earlier, visitor centers and welcome centers are one of the solutions, and Michael Barrett is here, the executive director of the ADK Mountain Club, and I wanted to give him a few minutes to talk about the plans for this space and what it can do for the region.
Welcome, everyone. So my first order of business was to give you all something of a warm welcome. I just didn't want to be so literal about it. So thanks so much for coming out, and thank you so much to the Explorer. You know, I'll get into it in a little bit, but one of the goals in our acquisition of this property is to create a community asset that is open to organizations throughout the region. And what the Explorer did for us was it gave us an opportunity very early on to walk that talk. So very much appreciated. It's an honor to co-host with you. So how did we get here in this space? I could fib and tell you that we had this brilliant vision early on, and this is just the manifestation of it. But we came upon it in a very practical way. Our educational programming, to the credit of our educators at ADK, is wildly popular. It's regularly sold out. Well, that's easy. Put on more programming. The problem is we don't have the classroom space. If you've been to Heart Lake, you know that we used to have our educational programming in our dining hall, and then we matriculated to our educational yurts. Well, we've exceeded our capacity very quickly. And so what to do? And our educators themselves, they office 2 to 3 to an office upstairs at the lodge, and there's not enough room to add more people, although I could easily do that. So what do we do about it? We needed more space, and we talked about building an education center to spec at Heart Lake. You know, it'd be expensive, but there'd be large classrooms and small classrooms, and offices, and it'd be incredible space. There were 2 problems. One, we didn't want a new building there, okay? And 2, this is a destination location for many people, 100,000 plus a year. They get up and they're very intentional about coming to Heart Lake. We wanted to serve a different constituency, and that is, visitors who may not know where they're going and how we can be an aid to them. And so we said, okay, let's kick the tires of what's available out there before we invest in a new asset. And there was a for sale sign out front here. The first thought that came to mind was we need to keep this accessible to the public. And so whether it checked any other boxes, we were interested in it. These 200 incredible acres with 10 miles of trails that through the Jubins have been made accessible to the public as a popular ski area since 1979, that needed to absolutely continue. So that was goal number 1. And then I don't need to tell this group about the size of the Adirondack Park and how it measures up to be more in terms of space than any 4 or 5 national parks, but we're without a visitor center, a strategically located, centrally located visitor center. So we can serve that need. And our goal in opening up this summer, we only took possession of this building in April. And then we were told about all the coding issues, and then the staff worked so hard to get us up to code, to be open by Memorial Day, to provide bathrooms, to provide hiker information, and also to provide the lower level rooms to help be a solution to the housing crisis up here, to support area nonprofits other than ours, so they can bring in interns this summer, and they are housing downstairs. So that's another asset. And then this space, this is an incredible room with these amazing views. It's certainly part of our plan to turn this into a world-class education center for classes to meet our 3 seasons at Heart Lake, which educates more than 550 area 4th graders each year to come and meet here when it's not ski season, when people are not coming in from the trails to enjoy a beverage or a sandwich. And so the opportunities to have an information center, an education center, address the office issue, address the housing crisis issue, while continuing to provide these 200 acres to the public, low-cost recreation. It just checked so many boxes. And so we want this to be a rising tide that lifts all boats in the regions. And so we're just so excited. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning, is making this a reality. So one of the benefits of you all being here is you can take some sort of mental picture of what it looked like. because we're working very hard to transform this space to achieve all of those goals that I just talked about. So thank you so much for being part of our very first event here at this Cascade Center, and I hope you have a great time. Thank you.
All right. Everybody can hear me? Yeah? Thumbs up? Thank you. You're all my first in-person event. I started in January 2020, so everything's been remote, and I'm really glad to see you all. So I'm Gwen. I'm covering policy. Mike and I have been on this journey together, checking out shuttle systems in New Hampshire and permits for Cadillac Mountain Sunrise and Acadia, and just seeing what's working, maybe what's not working, as Tracy was mentioning. And we're focused we're going to have some more discussions like this one on some of the other solutions we've been looking at. But we're happy to kick it off here with our crew. So I'll introduce, we've got Jill Weiss over here, who's the Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at SUNY ESF, and you also may know her from the High Peaks Strategic Planning Advisory Group work. We have Peter Pettengill, he's a Professor of Environmental Studies at St. Lawrence University. And then we have Julia Goren, the Deputy Executive Director of ADK. And then we have Peter Karis here, Vice President for Parks and Stewardship at Open Space Institute. And I'm going to give the floor to them to kind of.
Okay, I wish I wasn't going first, but that's okay. I'm Jill, as she said. I don't know if my mic. How's my mic doing? Is this okay? Okay, good. I actually have a pretty long history in environmental education and open space. First part of my career was in New York City, especially the outer boroughs. Probably was in several hundred public schools in my lifetime with live animals. But I also worked in the extensive parks system. New York City has 30,000 acres of parkland, 10,000 of it is forested, and it's always got people in it. And that means that people aren't always going to like the same things, right? I was fortunate enough to work on my PhD over at Antioch University, New England, and then work into a position at SUNY ESF, which is in Syracuse. And I think you're going to ask me about my current research later, right? So I don't need to go into that now.
Yeah, if you want to give them a tease,
Okay.
I won't begrudge you that.
Sure, no problem. As a researcher, I transitioned from an educator to a researcher because some of the projects that I worked on in New York City, while I was incredibly happy about them and very proud of them, there was often pieces missing, and those pieces usually had to do with public involvement and information sharing, and just also creating sort of institutional memory around special places. So when I continued my graduate work, I really investigated that on a bigger scale. I'd say my research now really looks at things in more of a landscape scale. So spread out over multiple states, not in just one particular area. The 5 projects I'm working on right now, the first one, I'd say the capstone one is the Alpine Stewardship Activities in the Northeast, which is having its 12th birthday. I study what Alpine stewards are doing in 4 states across the Northeast. And then that program has given birth to a hiker research program at these 6 of those 10 sites. And I'm also studying at the Adirondack Mountain Reserve. Does everyone know where that is? I'm studying the efficacy of that parking reservation system. We want to see if it's working for the people who are actually using it and working for people who might not be able to access it. I really want to figure that out. I also have a student working on a project down in the Catskills using novel Strava metro data and unmarked trail use. And then I've got a project on Cascade. Are you guys familiar with Cascade Mountain? Anybody? Okay, so I'm working with the Ecological Scorecard team, which is part of ESF's Adirondack Ecological Center. And what we're doing is doing a 360 ecological and social science review of the current Cascade Trail, the future Cascade Trail, and then we're going to study it again once they finish the reconstruction. So we'll really be looking at not only how it affects birds and plants and all sorts of things, but also how people behave differently on a built trail. And the rest I'll save for later.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Peter.
All right, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Good. So Peter Pettengill, I teach at St. Lawrence University. I've been living in the North Country for about 6 years now, so I still feel like I'm barely scratching the surface of the Adirondacks, but I'm very happy to be here, continue to learn about the area. In my former life, my PhD, my dissertation, looked at the relationship between transportation and recreation. My research was in Acadia National Park. I did a little bit in Yosemite, Zion as well, and that landed me in a position for the National Park Service at Grand Canyon National Park, where I did some visitor survey work related to day use and potentially perceived high levels of use or crowding on specific trails there, as well as some more backcountry and remote settings. Today, I'm fortunate in that my research, number one, my teaching comes first, so I love getting students outdoors, working with them. At St. Lawrence, we have something called the Adirondack semester, which is really an immersive and transformative experience for students there. And then on the research front, I find myself more in the realms of case studies. So I published a book a few years back with a couple of co-authors called Managing Outdoor Recreation, and this looked at case studies in national parks. So it's been very fun for me, and this is hopefully relevant for our conversation today, to think about what's happening here and maybe compare that to some other places across the country, because while each place is certainly exceptional, I think we can draw some parallels.
Hey, Julia.
Hi. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces all in this space. So I just want to start by saying it's nice to see all of you again. So I'm Julia Goren. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Adirondack Mountain Club. I get to be here in part because my early work with the Adirondack Mountain Club was up on the summits with the Summit Steward program, educating people about the fragile alpine vegetation and being on the front lines of helping manage visitor impacts and inspire people to greater stewardship, which is really what our work is all about. And then I also get to be up here a little bit because of my work for 3 years with the Adirondack Council on the Vision 2050 project. And it's nice to have many of my co-authors in the room with me right now, and so many familiar council faces. So for those reasons, and then of course in my work now with ADK, thinking about this particular location and Heart Lake, and ADK's role in really helping educate those visitors and educate, just as a reminder, we're all visitors when we're on state land. So educating all of us so that we can make sure that we are enjoying these places responsibly and making sure that we're leaving them better than we found them.
Thank you. All right, Peter. Peter
I'm
too.
up last.
Sorry.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm pretty humbled to be here. My name is Peter Karis, and I'm Vice President for Parks and Stewardship at Open Space Institute. And what that means is I wear two hats. I oversee our parks visioning and design and capital construction projects across our portfolio. I also oversee all of the lands that are within OSI as we either hold them or purchase them and before transfer to the state of New York. We do a lot of work with New York State Parks and also New York State DEC. And that kind of lives in my world as they're at OSI. I'm a landscape architect by background, and I come from the private world and found myself in conservation at Mohonk Preserve in Ulster County, which is the largest private nature preserve in the state. And through the work at Mohonk Preserve, I was working in partnership with OSI, and this has really become a dream job for me. So I get to dream about parks infrastructure all day across New York State. I do have some background in the Adirondacks as a visitor when I was younger, growing up in the Capital District, and have fond memories of here. So I have about 30 active projects across the state of varying scales and types. We've done everything from foot trails with smaller partners, but also new visitor centers at state parks, 3 of them, in fact, in New York. So we do a lot of work with exhibits and things about interpretation and education and how to make people feel welcome and comfortable when they arrive at these places, so that they know what to expect, they know what to do, and they feel welcome. It feels like they're supposed to be here. And to see the adaptive reuse that's kind of emerging here is such a great kind of theme for tonight, because building new is difficult, it's expensive, it's impactful, and the more places that you can reimagine to serve the public as a way to mitigate, some of the amounts of people that want to be in these spaces and have a right to be in these spaces. This is their park. It's important that these places are available. So we are working on 2 active projects in the Adirondacks. Some of you may have been to our Upper Works project in Tamanuca, which we finished phase 1 last year with a kind of a reconfiguration of the parking, a small expansion, a lot of historical interpretation and changes to that site to make it feel and speak to the history that's there. But also phase 2 coming up is a planned renovation of McNaughton Cottage, which will hopefully act as another outpost and education center node for the public as they enter the wilderness areas. We're also we're applying for a big grant in this cycle, working with DEC on the Lake Placid Trailhead for the new Adirondack Rail Trail. So OSI is trying to help them secure land, and also we're doing some visioning of what that trailhead might look like and how it might play a role as that new recreational resource comes online, which is quite different than anything else in the park.
Okay. We'll come back to you on some of those. That's good. Thanks very much for coming here. We're really glad to talk to you about everything. I'm gonna dive into some of the data. I think we'll get to first. I'm gonna go data and then a little bit of the visitor centers. I guess whoever wants to take this. What is the importance of data collection when you're starting to make management decisions, and what is being done in the Adirondacks? What are we missing? What is not being done, and what are the gaps?
I don't know if we can answer all of that. That's actually, you asked a lot of things, but
Well,
can I take the first part? Okay. So what I didn't get to before is that one of the reasons I'm here is that when I became a researcher, I wanted to make sure I became also a public scholar. And that means I'm going to always share my work with the public. I'm going to share my work with stakeholders. I'm going to share my work with not-for-profits. I'm going to make sure that my data does work for us. That is what it's for. One of the issues that we've got in academia is that often we're excited about a particular concept and we either just aren't thinking about other things, and we want to get our ideas out to our people and discover phenomena, right? But in the meantime, research and data sharing can actually solve some pretty practical problems. So one of the things I discovered through my 10-year work with the Alpine Stewardship work, but also as I got further into the High Peaks Advisory Group. And I should let you know, I have family in the region, except that my family solves problems with backhoes and a case of beer, not necessarily through data collection. But, it's a different way of looking at the world. But one of the things I realized is that besides the fact that a lot of data sets were locked away, not on purpose, it's just they just aren't available because they're in somebody's drawer and that person retired. Like, that's all it takes. But we have these huge gaps in understanding who our users are and who they're becoming. And if we want to serve them better and make the places they visit more sustainable, we have to better understand them. And I also uncovered this not just here, but at 5 other sites that management, whether that be the state or the federal government or not-for-profits that were taking caretakers of land, were making decisions based on anecdote not data. So their gut, which is fine. There's lots of land managers do have a lot of experience where their gut does play a part, and that's valuable, but not alone. So having data and learning how to communicate that to the public, and also communicating about the activity, making that more transparent, that's absolutely essential because the public is part of the story. So that I'll let Pete pick it up. So I think this is a good segue.
Yeah, all good stuff there for sure. And I'll do kind of two things. One will be kind of very applied case study, real world example, and the next will be a little more broad, theoretical, but I think maybe even more important. So at Grand Canyon, we looked at just visitor use counts on these really busy trails, right? There was this perception, at least among some people, that there was not just use, but overuse of trails. And what we found was, thinking about it objectively, not getting into whether it was too much use or too little use, was just what are the numbers? Basic baseline data. Using automated trail counters, we could get a pretty good estimate of how much use there was over the course of the busiest seasons, spring and fall. What we found was that, there were these massive spikes in use. Like when the north rim of the Grand Canyon opens, it actually closes during the winter, closes as much as you can close a park. And when it opens, you had this mass rush of people coming. And then they would head down the North Kaibab Trail and across to the other side of the canyon. Then the next weekend, another huge peak, right? So in and of itself, that information was really interesting to researchers, but what was even better was we could talk to a media specialist and have them just pump that information out to the public, because it happened one year and we thought, okay, well, maybe that's this year. What we found the following year is that this was an observable pattern. We could monitor it. We know when the place is going to be busy. The park can then flood the internet or social media with information saying, if you're planning on coming to Grand Canyon this weekend, know it's going to be very busy. And that way you can distribute use throughout the week. Or maybe some people just don't mind having a lot of other folks around. So that's a very practical, applied use of data and transparency with data for the public to make decisions, right? The other piece I think I've been hearing about, just in introductions even, the importance of these places to people, right? The general public, all people. So a lot of my work historically has been surveys around visitor experience. So is there one ideal experience for everyone? No. We have a wide diversity of visitors, right? They have different motivations. They want to participate in different activities. They might want to do that in different settings, something, almost from the urban all the way to the wild. When you have a park like Grand Canyon, which, as I've heard, is dwarfed by the Adirondacks, you have so much opportunity to provide such a diverse array of experiences. If we don't have that data, if we don't know what all these different types of individuals want, we can wind up with kind of a homogenized Adirondack experience, which I don't think is what anyone wants, or certainly I'm interested in making sure that we are serving a diverse constituency. It's New York State, it's a very diverse place.
Can you tell me, so when we were talking, you mentioned you also interviewed hikers, even on the trail. What was the value of doing that?
Just what I was speaking to, right? So in terms of these interviews, these are often surveys. So it's more than anecdotal evidence, right? A survey that could literally ask, what are your, and there's a wealth of information out there on what motivations for recreationists are. We can look at that and say, well, what do people want? What activities are they participating in? And then we can look at these different places and say, are we serving those needs? If we're not reaching out and engaging people, we just don't know. And I think, the world is changing, as it always has and always will. So it's important to not just think about the historical things people wanted in these places, but what they might want going forward and how we can serve that. This being said, I know as a social scientist interested in visitor experience, that is one activities that people want to participate in. Are they compatible with these various environments? So that should always be
you're working now for all
at the
different
forefront
groups.
of this thinking
How
too.
do you hope your research gets used?
I can give one example of a recent data preliminary finding. A survey of around 1,200 hikers last year let's call them recreational users. I got that from Julia a couple of years ago. Because they're not always hiking, right? It's making an assumption right out of the box. We asked them we provided a box. They could write whatever they want. What is your motivation for being here today? And, we have a couple of categories, but if you think of more traditional hiking, it might be communing with nature, great views, spending time with family. We do this hike every year at this time, a lot of that stuff. But over 50% reported either exercise or meeting a challenge. That's actually kind of a switch compared to most of the recreation and natural resource managers I've worked with over the last 10 years. They would not put exercise and personal challenge at over 50%. It would be in the mix, but not edging out the other activities. So by telling my colleagues this news, even though it's preliminary data, I'm still working on it, and we're going to collect 5,000 more surveys this year. I think they can start acting on it now. How can they adjust their education messaging, right? There's different interpretation and education techniques that are used depending on what people's motivations and interests are. And if we can adjust them to meet people where they're at, then we might be more successful getting a message across about, for example, preparedness or planning ahead, or self-dispersal, like picking a different place that week. Because I agree, we have to remember that this entire Northeast area, this greater northern bioregion, is a unique ecological area that is worth protecting too. So we do want to make sure both of these things are happening.
How was your data used when you were on the ground, talking to people?
Yeah, good question. There's still a draft environmental impact statement flying around up there in the Grand Canyon. So the one example, I would say the most applied one specifically related to information education, was absolutely, we know when this place is going to be busy. Let's get information to people. Let them make those choices. I think for me now, in terms of research, how I hope it gets used in this kind of case study approach, and now I'm looking deeply into the Adirondacks, is how can we learn from each other? So you're reporting across the Northeast, as well as I heard the Tetons, right? Other folks at Explorer is great. But compiling that, because the issues, while each place is unique, each place is special, issues are very similar. So if I can sit back and write a short story, really, about effective ways that people are addressing these different issues, hopefully we can learn from each other. I know the West Coast is different from the East Coast, it's different from Alaska, but I think the problems are very similar.
No, thank you. I'm going to come back to some more of this, but I'm going to come over to some visitor center questions. And this is probably for you too. The High Peaks Advisory Group kind of suggested this idea of a network of visitor centers. Is that, we have this one here. You said Upper Works is, coming along. Is it realistic though? And do you think it's going to happen? What is the importance of that in the grand scheme of all the, there's hundreds of pages of management ideas in this report. Where does this fit?
It's definitely realistic. It's happening.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's incredibly exciting is that it doesn't have to be an effort. It doesn't have to fall to the state. It can be done through partnerships. And, the Adirondack Mountain Club has always been working closely as a partner with the state to make sure that when we're getting a message out to the public, that we are doing so being clear with what the land manager wants us to share. Mm-hmm. I think absolutely it's feasible, it's realistic. It is more realistic to see a network of places like this, like OSIs, that are nonprofit entities or community centers that become these almost pop-up visitor centers or permanent visitor centers that can address people as they're coming in. And then before I cede the floor, I just want to say, in terms of the question of importance, so the best place to connect a visitor with information so that they recreate safely, that they have an experience that is the experience that they want to have, and that they do so in a way that protects this place. Because they're coming here for the place and they want to help be part of protecting it. The best way to do that is to connect with people before they show up. The next best place to connect with them is before they start their adventure. And that's what welcome centers and visitor centers do so well. We have the opportunity here to connect with someone as they're driving in. They may not have decided where they're going. They don't have a map. They, maybe are going to be here for a few ideas and for a few days, and all they know is we want to go for a hike. If we can get them that information now, that is way better than getting them that information when they show up already with a destination in mind, either because that experience isn't the right experience for them, or they're not prepared for that adventure, or the resource can't handle their feet on the trail that day. So they're hugely important and they're incredibly effective. I mean, if you think about the investment in this place versus the investment in search and rescue, every dollar that goes into this place will continue to give to visitors to come. Every dollar that goes into search and rescue is really valuable, but it takes care of the person that has to be rescued. So these dollars give forward.
Yeah, I'd agree. Visitor centers play a huge role in the multi-prong approach to educating people before they come, while they're at their computers, while they're on their way, and at the point where they're transitioning from their car into their adventure, as you said. They're all important. They're all valuable. I do think the state has a big role to play. These places are expensive to operate. And they're trying really hard. OSI helped DEC with a master plan for the old Frontier Town site, probably 5 years ago now. And there's a lot of great ideas. The campground got implemented. And that A-frame was not part of the conversation because it wasn't part of the property. And now that's sort of organically transitioned, even from private business perspective, that's acting as a quasi wayfinding station as people before they enter the park. So I think it's a whole host of approaches, and they all should be aware of each other and communicating and partnering with each other. It's vital.
And you both mentioned the ideal place to catch someone is before they even show up. What needs to get done there?
Yeah, I mean, what needs to get done there is, first of all, we need to have consistent messaging and a singular website that people would go to find information. If you are looking for information about hiking in the Grand Canyon, you're going to find the Grand Canyon National Park's website through the National Park Service. If you are looking for hiking information about the Adirondack Park, you're probably not going to find the DEC's website first. It's actually number 18, I think, in Google search. And if you find it, it's probably not going to be the easiest one to navigate to get information. So I think, the ideal answer is the Adirondack Park needs a singular voice to communicate out to the world about the recreational and other aspects of the park. Now, that's a really big lift. The next steps are that those of us who are entities with voice work together through, some kind of alliance so that we are communicating the same kind of message, so that whether somebody is getting their information from the Explorer or from Hamlets to Huts or from ADK, they're getting the same message. And that's helping them, again, make the choices to have the informed, to have the information to make choices about the kind of adventure they want to have. And again, when I say adventure, that could be a backcountry adventure. It could be walking around Mirror Lake. there is the right kind of adventure for every single person in the Adirondack Park. It's a really big, diverse, amazing place. We just have to help people be able to know that those opportunities exist.
Jill, can you tell me a little bit about your research and tell the folks here about the just the traveling and the places you're going and why you chose those places?
Okay, sure. Going back in time, I think Julia was one of the first people I interviewed 12 years ago. But the Alpine Stewardship Activities in the Northeast project started because I was really interested in how these programs, and if I think somebody said it earlier, but Alpine stewards are people who wait for you at mountaintops and then educate you about the fragile vegetation. This occurs in other places all over the world, actually, and especially in the Northeast. What's interesting about the Northeast is that some of these programs kind of sprouted up semi-independently with like-minded people who were kind of in touch, kind of not in touch over the years. It's almost like an island ecology story, and then it became like convergent evolution. Am I boring you yet? It's exciting, right? You love this stuff. Finches, just kidding. Anyway, what I learned by looking at all these programs is that the fact that they were effective, humans talking to humans is effective. Everybody agrees this. 2, that these programs are sustainable and long-standing, that their branding is recognized by visitors. 3, that their messaging is similar but not identical, not homogenized. That's really important because that actually connects the user with the place in kind of a personal way. And then 4, the fact that these folks started shared trainings, communicating more, and started to meet more regularly every 2 years at the Alpine Stewardship Gathering. The sites in my study include Baxter State Park, Acadia National Park. The main high peaks, my partners there are the Maine Appalachian Trail Club and now the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Mount Monadnock, which is my partners there are the New Hampshire Parks and Antioch University, New England. Dartmouth and Moosilauke. And in the White Mountains, my partners are AMC and the U.S. Forest Service. And that includes the Franconia Notch Working Group. And did I leave anybody? Oh, the Green Mountain Club and the Green. So that's Camel's Hump and Mansfield. And I think I hit everybody. I might have left somebody out. I apologize. Oh, and here. But I chose those places because they had these unique programs and were sharing information because I'm looking at this as a whole landscape. And then later, after 10 years of all of these people who spend day in and day out working with hikers, they were starting to see a change in hiker motivations, hiker behaviors, and they came to me with questions. So I wrote a grant, and now I'm trying to answer those questions. So at 6 of those sites, I'm finding out about hiker preparedness. When did you prepare? How did you prepare? Where did you look to get your information? What their activities are, why they're there today, what their motivations are. Also, their support of management actions that address capacity. Do you like shuttles? Are you interested in signing up for your hike in advance? That's a big question, and it might change whether or not people decide to come somewhere. But also the other thing that I discovered in a preliminary study in partnership with the Adirondack Council and ADK and ESF, this wasn't funded by anybody. This was an in-kind partnership that we pulled together. We found out that new hikers were kind of getting a bad rap, that new hikers do try to prepare. They do actually really do look for things. The information is just really hard to navigate. So, they want to do, this is a quote from a steward in the White Mountains. People want to do the right thing. They just don't always know what that thing is. And I think that that's where some of the stuff that you're saying really highlights that.
Oh, that's great. You're mentioning people talking to people is the effective strategy. And another question I had was, you have the summit stewards. You just mentioned you hire a lot of seasonal people. In the most popular part of the hiking season, we have assistant forest rangers that get hired around this time. Is there enough people out there doing this work, or do we need to?
This summer? No. I don't know where they all are. They're all van lifing it somewhere. Sorry.
No, there aren't enough people. There aren't enough people. I think the thing to step back and say is that in order to know how many people we need and where we need them, first, we need some data. And second, we need a plan. We need a visitor use management plan that looks at the Adirondack Park, thinks about how people are moving through the park, how they are accessing public lands and where those points of education might be, and what the goals should be and the desired conditions for our public lands. So that's a really important component, and thinking also about the communities that are also part of the component of the Adirondack Park. But my short answer, and I jumped in on this, but the Adirondack Mountain Club, we hire about 50 seasonals every single year. We have stewards here at Cascade, educating people. We have folks at the trailheads. We have folks on the summits. It's a big part of what we do and what we've always done. And we definitely think there should be more.
Can I add something? You brought up you really highlighted how a lot of this work is seasonal. Mm-hmm. And I would say that up until the pandemic really messed everything up. But up until the pandemic, I'm seeing a trend in the data that like your program, stewarding and these part-time summer positions are becoming a career pathway, whereas before it was like a throwaway summer gig. That's a significant change. And that means that people who are interested in being in these special places also want to work in these special places. So now it's up to us. How do we fill in that gap season, that stick season, that mud season, right? To make sure somebody can build a career and stay, right? I mean, you guys probably run into that whole, knowledge drain, just like New Hampshire is. You want your young, smart people to stay here and reinvest in the community. If they can't get a job year round and can't afford to live here, that, and you lose knowledge every time you have to rehire every year, right?
Is anybody doing that right now that you've seen, or anybody else?
They're doing it.
Yes. Yes. I mean, we are.
Yeah.
So the Adirondack Mountain Club hires a whole bunch of seasonals every year. We try to keep a bunch of them on. We're really excited to be able to now have a brand new facility where we can keep people on in the wintertime. We provide our staff with housing so that we're addressing the affordable housing crisis in this area. We're making it possible for folks to live here, and not just to live here, not just to be in an isolated apartment somewhere in somebody's basement in Lake Placid or, wherever they could afford to live, but to live with peers and to build community here and to set down roots, and those people stay. So the Summit Steward program, for example, 25% of the Summit stewards who have been part of the program, which has been around for more than 30 years now, they've stayed. They are professionals. They are people who are giving back to the community and folks who are helping address the population concerns of the Adirondack Park. So I think there's a huge opportunity, and yes, we're one of the organizations that's really trying to help make that switch from seasonal work to building a career and building a life here in this special place.
What did you have?
I mentioned earlier, my interest now is getting young people out working in the outdoors. What has just been described is amazing, right? And more of that, and it's ideal. My biggest struggle, one of my biggest struggles with getting folks working in park settings has already been mentioned. It's like, okay, I'll do that for a summer. That'll be fun, but I know there's no future in this. Clearly that is not the case based on the people you see in front of you right now. But it's a challenge, it's a perception that's out there, and I hope that's a paradigm shift. I hope that we can continue to make a ladder for people to continue to grow. Can I say something I'm going to regret now? So
Of
I
course.
think the initial question was, are there enough people out there,
Yeah.
right? Like, do we have enough folks out there? This is my personal thing, okay? This is not necessarily a data-driven research thing. But I get concerned. I'm somebody who wants to go out, and being self-serving here a little, I'm somebody who wants to go out and go to a mountain summit and not see anybody. And I don't want somebody to tell me how to behave on every single mountain summit across the Adirondacks or across the country. So again, I love everything that was just said, by the way. And I have a number of students who have been summit stewards, and I love the work. But I think in thinking of that bigger picture, right, in terms of that diverse set of opportunities, we need to be careful about making every place look the same.
And can I throw on that and just say that's why you need a plan. That's why visitor use management plan is so important, because it's not every peak that needs a summit steward. It's not every trail that needs a trailhead steward. It's some places. And until you have a plan, then you don't know where those places are.
Do you have anything to add?
Not on that topic.
Okay. You're all talking about visitor use management. And that's like one of the banes of my existence as a reporter, to be writing something that says visitor use management. Because what does that mean to the person who is just reading, happens to come across an Explorer article, has never really thought about any of this before? How do we communicate that better to your average public? Maybe this audience already knows we're kind of interested in these ideas, but how do we explain what that is? And can you give me the layman's version of what is a visitor use management framework? Sorry.
I actually want to just talk about the word management just for a second,
Sure.
because I'd say here in this part of New York State, eminent domain has really left its mark on a lot of communities. And so when they hear the word management, they're going to think of it a lot differently than maybe you and I in a classroom would think of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one of the ways we can help, by researchers can help, is by being more precise with our language, and then also explaining what we mean when we use the words that we're using. So I'm glad you're asking, but I also want to say that I think that when we throw around the word management, it can get really messy, because it depends on what ears people have on, right? That
Yeah.
they're going to think of it differently. But I think the visitor use management framework is meant to be used in conjunction also with an ecological monitoring plan, because what you're trying to do is basically you're trying to manage a resource sustainably for both users and for the ecology, correct? So the idea is to monitor to see how the site is used, see what's ideal for the site ecologically, establish some kind of, I'm going to use the word benchmark, sorry, for those of you, what do you like to use?
Standard.
He's a standard guy.
Current main threshold.
But that's how it is. That's how it is in our world. We have to it is these
Yeah.
like tweezers with words. But we establish some kind of standard or benchmark or threshold and say, we're going to watch this. And if it gets to this point where we can't tolerate it anymore, it's known as limits of acceptable change. Then we will have an action plan already in place. We're not going, this is the other issue here and elsewhere, is that a lot of our responses are reactionary. Like, something has happened, so now we must do something. Instead of saying, oh, it is, this particular site is site C3D.6. And that means because of this bird species, these kinds of plants, this kind of highway use level, and the number of users, this is the action plan we'll start with. And I think one of the questions said something like, what's the right way? No, collaborative adaptive management means you start with your plan, and then you need to tweak it to fit all of the different ways. So is that a good answer?
No, I think did that help? It helped me a little bit.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Thumbs down?
A little bit.
I'll jump in. Maybe.
Yeah.
So visitor use management is not new. I think we just heard that, all right? So there have been many frameworks, which this is just the latest iteration of. Visitor impact management, visitor experience and resource protection, VERP, the list goes on and on. So people have been working at this for a long time. Adaptive management is not new.
That's another one that
Yeah, right? So visitor use management, the first time I heard that, I was like, I'm a visitor. I don't feel like I use these places, but I visit them and I don't want to be managed. So it is perhaps an unfortunate acronym. I also think that there's something to be said for it because it's direct. We're not talking about hypothetical issues regarding ecology. Where do those issues come from? They come from us. So like, it is direct. We are going to manage visitors. That's a reality. If I tried to talk about a VUM framework, I'd try to do it in 3 steps. And I'd say 1, define your management objectives and associated indicators and qualities of standards. So what are your objectives? And then what are ways to kind of get at those objectives? How can we describe them? How can we monitor them? And I can use an example in a moment if we want to. 2, we're going to monitor those indicators and standards. If we see those standards exceeded or violated, right? So an example being maybe it's a threatened plant and it goes beyond an unacceptable level. It's becoming more endangered, whatever that level is, and I'm not the person to answer that. I want a plant biologist to do that, right, and weigh in. When you have that standard set, then you go, and it's violated, you've exceeded it, then you go to step 3, which is thinking about strategies to address it. And ideally, as Jill just said, you have a whole series of strategies and practices that you can apply. Absolutely. Your plant biologist, your ornithologist, all your ologists, archaeologists, whatever your resources are, you need them there. Including social scientists regarding things like visitor experience, things like solitude. How does one measure solitude? I think that's important and something you want to keep too. Was that any better or just more jargon?
No, that's helpful. Yeah.
Can I throw a metaphor?
Sure.
Because I'm an educator and that's what I do. So I think of visitor use management like this. You want to go on a trip. First, you need to know where you want to go. Then you need to come up with a plan for how you're going to get there. And then you need to check along the way and make sure that you're following the route to get there. And you might make a wrong turn and then you have to come back. And that's visitor use management. We need to get somewhere. We need to know where we want to go. We need to make a plan for how to get there. And that's based on our research that helps us figure out how to get there. And if, as we're going along, we notice that we're going the wrong way or we're going a little too fast, we have to change our speed, we adapt. And so we're managing how we get there, and that helps us arrive at the goal.
That's important. The adaptation part is important. It's not because you purposely made the wrong turn. You didn't know it was the wrong turn. It was an old sign. Who knows? But but that's important. Just because something has to get retooled a little bit doesn't mean the process is a failure. That's something that I think could get miscommunicated because it is this adaptive process. And when you say adaptive management, I'll always add collaborative adaptive management because that's my training because I really want to see more stakeholder involvement in all these processes.
Yeah, I just want to say, when we went to Acadia, they had come out with all these permits for like closing off roads and things, and it wasn't working for the first season, so they stopped it. So that was, I think maybe that would be an example of adaptive management where they realized that this was too much too soon. Let's pull back and we'll come back to it at another point. But and ask one more question. I want to get to you on your visitor centers, and then we'll open it up to some audience questions. Peter, you're doing a lot of different visitor center work just south of us here, and I think we're all trying to learn that this is part of our solutions reporting is what's working elsewhere, and I think we see some examples already in New York. Can you tell me a little bit about your role. You were mentioning your varying degrees of influence
involvement.
and involvement
Yeah.
in different centers.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I mean, I'll say words matter, and messaging is important. And when you can tell things and communicate information to people in a way that they can understand, that they can understand a place, a history of a place, the resources of a place, the complexities of a place, in a way that is clear. It crosses all sorts of ages. Kids can understand it. Older folks can understand it. Really, you're building the stewards of tomorrow, right? And that's what, in our experience, these visitor centers have done. Is it's a landing place that people can feel safe. They know that they're supposed to be there. There are bathrooms. I will say, bathrooms is the number one thing that we hear everywhere. And you can put a lot of things in your bathrooms as a strategy to get people to read them. But you're trying to get people to buy in, right, and care. And when they care and when they understand, they're going to be better visitors, right? And it's a long game. We have a program at OSI, Conservation Diversity Fellowships, where we're bringing in diverse young people into the organization and having them experience the breadth of conservation that OSI does, in hopes that we're building the diverse future conservationists working at nonprofits and other places, doing the work that we're doing now. So although you got to deal with issues in the moment, it's about for us, we always think about trying to build those future stewards. And those visitor centers are places that you can engage young people. You can use exhibits to kind of get them thinking, get them to touch things. I mean, there's the Wild Center is an incredible visitor center that has these incredible exhibits that are so engaging. We've tried little things like that, and they work. Some of them work. Most of them work, but some of them don't. But again, they're trying to tell it in the frame of a story, which is much easier for people to understand. So let's say language matters, and that these places that you can show them, they can interact with these things, they're going to be better visitors in the future.
Can you tell us quickly what's happening at Minnewaska and
Sure.
some of those?
So Minnewaska is my baby, but OSI in varying degrees of increasing involvement in visitor centers. Minnewaska State Park Preserve is the third largest state park in the state. It's in Ulster County, New York, and it is, like the Adirondacks, a very unique, incredible place. Otherworldly, I'll say, and really kind of my center. I love the comics. But we were charged, and we got the state to see things differently. And when you arrived at Minnewaska before, it was a kiosk in Porta Johns at the most incredible park, in my opinion, in the state of New York. And we helped transform that place by bringing resources, by bringing some vision, and seeding kind of this change of thinking in State Park. And kind of the cherry on top is the Lake Minnewaska Visitor Center, which just won the Sustainable Design Award from an outfit in Chicago. But really, that visitor center speaks to that park. It's part of that place. We worked incredibly hard with the siting of that building, the way it fit into the landscape, so it was non-competing. And then thinking about how people flow through and interact with the exhibits there to learn about their adventure. And the building's not set up to hang out in. It's literally you enter, there are bathrooms, you make contact, there are exhibits, and then you're out the door and you're on your adventure. It's not about staying in the visitor center, although you can. It has a beautiful lawn with a view, and that might be the limit of some people's adventure, is to come out on this deck right here and look at those views, right? And then go into town and support the local economy. So, but Minnewaska was really kind of a labor of love. I don't know if OSI will do a visitor center to that, be involved to that extent. Again, it was a lot, but really we kind of think it is a shining star in our portfolio. We're really proud of it. I would encourage everybody to go to Minnewaska.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.